can feel my body hold against the concrete, but I can't seem to get enough. My mind is fixed on what it wants. I just let you beat me, looks can be deceiving. Let you get the best of me, in bed with my worst enemy. This is a no-go, I just can't take hold. This is a danger zone, back up and get me home. This is a no-go, I just can't take hold. This is a danger zone, back up and get me. So put your hand in mine, follow me, let me waste your time. Set up feet, do some stupid shit. Take a seat, let me waste your time. So put your
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lawyer's Den. My name is Nick Palavito. I'll be your host for today's show. And today we have a very exciting presentation because it involves a case that has made it all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. And this is a very famous case. It's called the Department of State versus AIDS vaccine advocacy. So what is this all about? Well, what it's about is the impoundment of these funds for the AIDS vaccine and for Trump's impoundment law. So he basically said, well, you can't make these payments anymore. And the district court said, oh, yes, they can. And then there was a stay. And then it went all the way to the Supreme Court in an unpublished opinion, basically an unsigned opinion. They said, yeah, you have to release the funds. So with that, that's just kind of like the brief of the facts. But it was a 5-4 decision, which was an unsigned order, and it's become the first case that we know of that went to the Supreme Court regarding Donald Trump. So with that, we do have lawyers in the den. They're waiting to explain more about the history and the facts of the case. And one is a constitutional lawyer, Jeff Teichert from Utah, who used to be an assistant attorney general at the state of Utah. And Jeff, I think you probably followed this case, Department of State versus the AIDS advocacy. And what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I can't claim to be an expert on this case, and I haven't followed it as closely as perhaps I should, given my interest in this whole subject. But as I understand it, the Supreme Court voted 5-4 against the Trump administration ordering the release of nearly $2 billion in foreign aid funds that have been frozen. And it upheld a lower court mandate to disperse payments to contractors and grant recipients of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. That acronym has been thrown around a lot lately. And my understanding is Judge Ali at the district court level issued a temporary restraining order requiring the administration to release the funds, and that's made its way to the Supreme Court, and they've sustained that ruling. The three more liberal members of the court, and we're talking judicial liberal, not necessarily the conventional political liberal, but they were joined by Justice Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice Roberts in saying that these funds had to be distributed. Now, I'm a little curious as to where this is going to go, because I think at least part of the basis of the ruling was that some of these funds were contracted and already earned. So just as a matter of contract law, it wouldn't really be fair for the government to sign a contract with a private contractor and then fail to deliver once the contract had been performed. So is this a question of constitutional law, or is it merely a question of contract law? And I think that's going to be an interesting component to see how I think there's going to be many rulings on subjects like this going forward.
Yeah, we also have Peter Bennett, and we're going to get his opinion on this. I don't know if you've been following this case, Peter, but it involves $2 billion, as Justice Alito said, going out the door and not coming back. But what are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, what's $2 billion when you owe 36 trillion or 125 trillion? No, I'm joking. Anyway, first I always like to start with the background, and they save my more legal and ethical arguments for later. So this is my report on this in terms of the background. Last week on Wednesday, a divided Supreme Court declined to let the administration withhold payment to foreign aid organizations for work they already performed for the government. The court, in a 5-4 decision, close one, upheld Washington's Amir Ali, as you mentioned, order that they had to promptly release the funds to the contractors and recipients of grants from the U.S. Agency for International Development and State Department for their past work. Now, the dissent is interesting and it's a good fodder for argument. Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh dissented, with Alito writing the following: does a single district court who likely lacks jurisdiction have the unchecked power to compel the government of the United States to pay out and probably lose for $2 billion taxpayer dollars? The answer to that question should be an emphatic no, but a majority of the court apparently thinks otherwise. I am stunned, close quote. Then on Friday, the federal judge at the lower court said he set a Monday deadline for the administration to release the millions of dollars in foreign aid payments, and that's the basis for it. I'll hand it back to the panel for now.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I found Justice Alito's dissent to be quite interesting. He goes, "I am stunned," and I was going, but then I started thinking what Jeff thought about also. Now, wait a minute. We have a lot of people that are contractors who have already performed their job and they're not getting paid. So wouldn't you think that he should not be so stunned? Because if I was working or did some work for the federal government and I'm not getting paid because they decide in their infinite wisdom to freeze the funds, shouldn't the people that would be stunned be the contractors? As opposed to Justice Alito? Is Justice Alito, what I'm saying, is he that far removed from reality? What are your thoughts on that, Jeff? Or yeah, Peter, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, that was one of my points, that this is money that was already contracted on one side. So Jeff is right about the fact this is contract law. I mean, you've made a contract to pay somebody and they're depending on it. They've already maybe spent some of the money that was allocated or budgeted for it, whatever. And again, it's pure contract law on one side. On the other side, it's really almost like, what is the sound of, of a tree falling in the woods? Because the other side is the executive is supposed to have administrative power over how money is spent, one. And two, at least a strong argument might be made, but I don't think it was made specifically enough that there's fraud involved. Because let's say you say, well, this is a contract, but it's fraud. But the problem is, I don't think that the Trump administration broke that out enough. They didn't say, oh, this is all fraud. They just said they didn't like it. So had they made arguments about fraud, then that could have been an argument against contract law, because you would have said this is a fraudulent contract. But the way it stands, this is, again, money that was already promised under contract law.
Okay, so what are your thoughts about that, Jeff? Was this money that was already contracted? And so why is Justice Alito stunned?
I find this interesting that this, how Supreme Court opinions can be. Now, this one I think was fairly rushed because it was based on people were trying to overturn a preliminary injunction that had been hastily pushed through the district court. But this opinion, Department of State versus AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition, is one paragraph long. It's very short. And it says that the district court ordered the government to issue payments for a portion of the paused disbursements, those owed for work already completed before the issuance of the district court's temporary restraining order by 11:59 p.m. on February 26th. That sounds to me like it's a matter of contract law. Several hours before that deadline, the government filed this application to vacate the district court's order, blah, blah, blah. The Chief Justice entered an administrative stay shortly before the 11:59 p.m. deadline and subsequently referred the application to the entire court. And they just said the application is denied given that the deadline in the challenged order has now passed, and in light of ongoing preliminary injunction proceedings, the district court should clarify what obligations the government must fulfill to ensure compliance with the order, with due regard for the feasibility of any compliance timelines. I don't see anything in that about the Constitution. I think it's saying there were these payments that had already been earned. This is a matter of contract law. We own the money, pay it. Now,
interesting, Jeff, because first of all, you just opened up something about narrow versus wide views of things, and so by saying already completed, first of all, if there is fraud in there, it could be broken out and said this was never completed because it was fraudulent. So that would say at least you'd have to fight each tooth and nail on each payment and say, okay, this is not completed, or you could say this was not completed, successfully, or in other words, a lot of this is being cut because maybe they could say, well, this was not the purpose of the money, or but again, they would probably lose on most of the money, because most of this, even though they may disagree with some of the purposes, which some of them might seem outrageous to the public, they would be specified. So if they were unreasonable but completed, it would be hard to argue narrowly.
Yeah, but don't you have to plead fraud specifically? You can't have general allegations of fraud. I mean, I have to go back to my old civil procedure classes, but I think I remember them saying you have to plead it specifically. You can't just say, "Oh, there was fraud." And
you're absolutely right, Nick. And
so the thing is,
that was my point.
Flood there.
Right, that was my point, that they would have had to break it out initially,
right,
but
exactly.
There is still an opportunity to break it out if they can say, okay, here's 100, I'm just making up a number, 50 things or whatever, and 10 of these were not completed because they were totally fraudulent. It's just different to disagree about the purpose, but if it's actual fraud, then there would still be room under this ruling, and even the lower courts, to challenge some of it as not completed or not completed because of fraud.
Okay, there's some strange things here, Jeff, and maybe you can shed some light on it. One's a 5-4 decision, unsigned order. I always hated that.
Right.
Why would they do an unsigned order? Sign a bloody name if that's going to be your order. What's the story on that? Do you know, Jeff?
Interesting.
I know.
I don't know what the story is in this particular case. I mean, I know they've done it in very consequential cases before, like the one that comes to mind, I believe, was Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which was a failed attempt to overturn Roe versus Wade. Well, I think I was in law school when that one came down, but it was a per curiam opinion. It was unsigned.
What does that mean, Jeff? I have no idea what that means, and why.
Well,
what and why?
In that particular case, there was no opinion that got 5 votes. There were I think the main opinion had 4 votes, and so they called it the plurality opinion. Now that may have had been some reason why nobody wanted to sign it, because it didn't get 5 votes. I'm not sure. In this situation, it looks like though they did
they got 5 votes
decision, and I think maybe because it was such a short, I mean, it's literally only a paragraph. You can read it in like.
All right, it's only a paragraph.
Yeah, it takes about 60 seconds to read the whole opinion. And maybe they were like, we're not going to, this isn't a particularly historic opinion. So we're going to all just say this is ours. Maybe it was written by a law clerk and they all just signed it. I don't know.
There's also out there what they call unpublished opinions. And the thing is, here's the deal with the unpublished opinions. They're opinions that are unpublished, but they're published. So you read them, but the thing is, the reason they call them unpublished opinions is you can't cite them as precedent in any other case that you're working on.
Well,
and if you do, have you been down this rocky road before, Jeff? If you do cite them,
sometimes.
Yeah, if you do, you're subject to sanctions. So what happens when you read through these appellate courts cases, you'll come across unpublished opinions, which are published, but the thing is they have a little hook to it. You can't cite them as that. So when I saw this come down, I was going, well, unpublished opinions I'm familiar with, but this one goes a step further, an unsigned order. Oh, you see what I mean? And so that was something that I wasn't really sure about. And then the other thing that Alito did, who actually wrote more extensively than the majority just one paragraph, sent it back to the, I think they had a district court. Yes, it was a U.S. District Court Judge, Amir Ali, sent it back and they ruled in his favor. But there was one thing also interesting that Justice Alito did. He said they may not have jurisdiction. Okay, which is a big thing. Yeah, okay. He mentioned it.
Interesting issue.
But where did they not have jurisdiction? I mean, there was one court case that said, oh, we have to take jurisdiction because no one else will. If they don't have jurisdiction, who does? And Alito didn't elaborate on that. In other words, I'm going like, jurisdiction is very important. He was basically alluding to the U.S. District Court Judge Ali not to have jurisdiction over this particular case. Okay. Then who does?
The issue, which is really one of concern. I mean, the administration has been challenged a lot, obviously. Constantly, they've won some, they've lost a bunch, some on procedural grounds, as we've discussed in the last 2 weeks. But the real question is, can any small, basically small court, district court, or, the smallest level court in the state suddenly close down or affect federal operations, at that level? What about the Constitution separating, judicial and executive functions? As a matter of fact, just as a footnote, but I don't think it'll pass, there's a movement in the Republican Congress to say that courts can only rule on cases in terms of the parties that are suing. So, and in this case, that wouldn't have affected anything because possibly, but they're saying you can't just have one plaintiff come who's affected and say, I want to change national opinion. And there are courts all over the country. And it's a complicated issue too, because it's so easy on either side to pick your forum. So then, in previous years, maybe somebody would bring something in Texas or whatever. Now they might bring it in, New York or Oregon or whatever, Seattle. So really, that is a big issue, but I think they're not going to be able to restrict that, but it probably should be restricted at some level to control courts on both sides, mucking up federal operations. What do you think?
Well, I mean, the thing is, it's going to be important, especially with Trump having a lot of cases. They're going to keep us busy on the lawyer's den for quite some time.
Oh, yeah.
Then the other thing that goes on, because when I was reading Alito's, it seemed more like he had his political opinion. And even though I agree with his political opinion, the court has no business being in politics. And his opinion was basically, well, the money could be siphoned off and it could all be gone and we'll never see it again. And so that's bad. And hence I'm going to, restrict the funds going out. But that's not his decision to make. His decision really to make is a legal one, not a political one. Now, on the political front, this is where I found this fascinating. Justice Roberts is no surprise. He's a pretty steady guy. In other words, he's going to vote his conscience. He doesn't care about the politics or the party. But here was the one that was really outstanding, Amy Coney Barrett.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah.
Okay. She was a Trump appointee. Now, note, she went to Notre Dame. The rest of them went to Ivy League schools. Okay.
Sure.
The Ivy League, I'm not really impressed with anymore after seeing what's been graduating from the Ivy League recently. So I've kind of downgraded the Ivy League in the legal area. But Amy Coney Barrett, I thought was pretty impressive because she was a Trump appointee, one of the most recent Trump appointees, and she had no problem sticking it the other way. So what are your thoughts about this, Jeff? It looks like the court is pretty independent. Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, a couple of things that I think about that, and I'm not going to make a political analysis of it because I think there's enough pundits out there trying to see it just in terms of politics. But this is a proud tradition the Supreme Court has. I mean, without the justices that Richard Nixon appointed, some of the most consequential decisions in the Supreme Court regarding Watergate would have gone the other way. And they, the justices that he had appointed that ruled against him in those cases basically said, once we're on the court, we owe no loyalty, even to the president that appointed us, that our objectivity comes first. And I think that's absolutely right. Now, whether Justice Barrett has been right in all these or not, I think she's right to be willing to rule against the president that appointed her. And in this case, I don't think it's any secret that I largely support Trump, but I'll speak out against him when I think he's wrong, and I think he's been wrong a few times.
What are your thoughts about Amy? Because this is pretty big, Peter.
Well, first of all, this, if anything, shows me the strength of the plaintiff's case, because, and I see the point. Again, contract law previously spent funds by the agencies, the committed funds, and looking backwards versus forwards, had it been possibly money that was, and even the ruling, we were talking about funds that have already been complied with, in terms of the requirements. So I think it shows the strength of the case. And the other interesting thing is, again, the independence of the Supreme Court. Many, let's not categorize them only as, let's say, liberals or Democrats, but in general, have criticized the Supreme Court so much over the years, saying, it's too conservative when they don't like the decision. But yet there's been quite a lot of decisions, even in the last few weeks, and another one today. I believe it was today. But there have been a lot of decisions that show that they are independent. They're looking at the law, and that's what the goal of Roberts is. Roberts' goal is to keep them out of politics and keep it to the law. And that's the way the Supreme Court should be. And they shouldn't have been that criticized over the years. Sometimes there were movements to say, let's expand it or limit the terms or whatever. But a lot of these decisions have been right. And even if you look at controversial decisions like the one that repealed Roe v. Wade, there was legal arguments that were made that were valid. Even, I personally don't like, I am for choice. I don't think the government has, I'm a libertarian in general, and I want the government out of everything I can get them out of. I don't think they should be deciding on abortion, even though personally, I have my feelings about it. But the point is, they were so attacked for that decision on political grounds, and not everything is political. And in the end, that decision was really based on the fact that this is a state's right, not a federal, power. And, that I'm always in favor of state versus, in general, when given the choice. Let a state decide over the federal. It's more local. And yet they were so attacked for that. And this just shows their independence. A lot of these decisions recently show that they're really looking at the law, which is what's their job is.
Yeah, their job is to be the referee. But are we going to have a little problem with DOJ and these executive orders after this decision, Jeff? Because the thing is, it looks like this just puts a stop to slowing down the funds that are just draining out of Washington, D.C. Is this going to slow down DOJ and these executive orders coming from Trump relating to empowering funds? What are your thoughts?
Well, Trump has said that he's going to obey the court orders, even if he challenges them or appeals them or whatever. And I think he will. Is it going to slow down DOJ? I think it's going to slow down the specific orders that get limited or outright overturned. I think it'll slow those down. Is it going to slow Trump down in issuing them? I don't think so.
Not at all.
I think he's going to try and stay ahead of the courts on these, because courts tend to move relatively slowly. This little one paragraph decision that we're talking about tonight, that made its way to the Supreme Court in lightning speed.
Yeah.
A lot of these could take years to get that far. And I think there's something interesting too, along the lines of what Peter said a minute ago. Justice Alito wrote, even if the majority is unwilling to vacate the district court's order, it should at least stay the district court's enforcement until the government is able to petition for a writ of certiorari.
Yeah. I mean, when I was looking at Justice Alito, and this is maybe just in general, should Justice Alito put in such emotional words in his opinion, like "I'm stunned"? I mean, where does that type of language have any bearing in a opinion by a Supreme Court justice? What are your thoughts on that, Peter? In other words, you shouldn't be stunned, or I'm thrown, or oh, it's just really hurt the cockles of my heart. Is that really something that you want to hear from a jurist? Don't you want to hear the cold, hard facts and the cold, hard law, not somebody, I'm stunned, I'm emotionally bankrupt, or whatever Alito was doing when he said that. So it really bothered me that he would actually put that in his opinion. I would have thought twice to put, I'm stunned by how the majority acted. What are your thoughts on that, Peter?
Well, it's clearly strong language. Maybe, there was strong disagreement. Obviously he feels strongly, obviously. But in this case, I don't know. I don't think it's stunning. But I want to get back to that, will it slow down Doge? Because to me, that's a more interesting point. Number one, I think it will slow down Doge to a point with all these lawsuits. But just like last 2 weeks, we've discussed issues where the Trump administration was wrong procedurally, and the court was right, but they can make adjustments. And also, as you said, I mean, Trump administration will just keep attacking the fraud. I want to bring something out. This is unbelievable in terms of fraud. So it just turned out this week, I read this, that there were $311 million in COVID loans given to children under 11 years old. $311 million given to kids under 11 years old. I think there might be some fraud there. And the thing is, which I've brought up already, the government, whether we're $36 trillion in debt, but counting unfunded liabilities, I think we're $125 trillion in debt, which would basically make us bankrupt because it would be more than the whole stock market, bond market, commercial real estate, and private real estate in the United States, privately owned. I mean, we owe so much money and we've been managed so poorly. So I think this will be a constant attack on the fraud, the waste. It's just going to be waves and waves. The Congress is going to help, cut this stuff. You get into hard issues of, where you get value. But a lot of this stuff is just incredible fraud and waste. And it's just like throwing money around like it's just, free. So I know that, Trump never sleeps, basically. So he's going to keep creating things. And now he's got his cabinet in place. They'll be working hard. These people are incredibly hard. I had originally wanted to go to Washington to work on the debt issue. I wrote a report, but nobody's responded to it yet. I thought it was brilliant, but that's a separate issue. I don't know if they ever will. But the point is, I feel mixed about it because I know if I went there, I'd probably have to work 24 hours a day almost, 6 hours of sleep, 7 hours of sleep, because they were working tirelessly to cut fraud. So in the end, I think, some of these legal issues, even when they're wrong, will just, evolve. But that said, the $2 billion, a lot of it could be out the door.
Yeah. Last thing deals with this, because there are 3 different branches in the great Washington, D.C. area. Has Trump considered you need to work with Congress? And would the decision been different if Congress had weighed in and said, yes, we want to stop the funds flowing also? Would the courts look at this differently? What are your thoughts?
Nick, I hate to say this, but we're at 29-10, and I think we're
break.
Man. So
yeah,
I'll give you a super quick answer. I think
okay.
Congress, if it's contract law, Congress can't overrule it either. But we're going to have to close out the show pretty quickly. But yeah, you're right. I think he's learning to work with Congress. It's a learning process. And, now they're negotiating the budget deal. And there's only so much on the other side because, there's tight Congress and not everything can be passed anyway. But it's a constant war. It's a war against expenses, fraud, and trying to get the budget under wraps. But we are about a time. You better close it out, Nick.
Yeah, we're going to close it out, but it looks like we're going to have some exciting cases coming down from the Supreme Court very quickly. And we'll see you next week on Lawyer's Den. Bye-bye.
I can feel my body cold against the concrete, but I can't seem to get enough. My mind is fixed on what it wants. I just let you beat me, look at me deceiving. Let you get the best of me, in bed with my worst enemy. This is a no-go, I just can't take hold. This is a danger zone, back up and get me home. This is a no-go, I just can't take hold. This is a danger zone, back up and get me. So put your hand in